Good evening and welcome. My name is John Barnes. I'm chairing the committee tonight in place of Councillor Drayson, who is on holiday. The officers present tonight are Lorna Ford, Chief Executive, Andrew Valance, Deputy Chief Executive, and also Section 151 officer. I won't list all the members present, but I will say welcome to them all. Their name tags should come up on screen if they speak. Without more ado, can we turn to the minutes? Are they accepted as a true and accurate record? Thank you. I will sign them. Yep. Apologies for absence, please, Louise.
Apologies received from Councillors Delaney and Councillor Drayson, Chair.
We are expecting Duncan Ellis online. He is the former Chief Finance Officer, currently in an interim capacity. But if he doesn't turn up, I will ask Andrew to take his items. Additional agenda items, are there any?
No, there are none, Chair.
Thank you. Disclosure of interest? None. Dispensations? There are none. In which case we move to the standards report, which is our draft annual report to the Council on ethical standards meetings. Lorna, are you going to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. This is actually the report of the monitoring officer, Linda Walker, who's on holiday at the moment, so I'm presenting this report. I understand the independent persons have seen the report and are happy with it. So the purpose of this report is to set out a bit of a summary, really, of ethical standards matters from the previous year. The main things to bring to the committee's attention was the introduction back in May last year of a new code of conduct, the LGA's new code of conduct, and that was quite a significant change for the council, and I think we've been getting used to that new code of conduct over this year. The other thing that this report does is summarise the member complaints that have come into us over the last year, and in paragraph 9 we've got a bit of a summary there of those complaints. The number of complaints about district councillors was 11, but by far the majority, 38, was about our parish and town councillors, and we can see the reasons in that table for the outcome of those complaints. And they do get reported on a regular basis in the standards part of this meeting. The other thing the report does is to summarise the member training that has taken place in relation to standards. There have been 2 sessions that have taken place. The first was in December 23 at the parish assembly, and the monitoring officer provided an overview of the code of conduct and the changes there. And she also led a session about member interests in January. One of the things we are reviewing at the moment is the arrangements for handling complaints, and there's a new process that's been trialled, a triage process that's really trying to overcome some of the trivial and vexatious complaints that we receive, and we'll see how that goes and report back to the committee. There is something to add into the report. The report didn't mention the fact that we have agreed to separate the committee, and I think that's something. So the Audit and Standards Committee will be 2 separate functions going forward, and I think we need to make an amendment to this report to make sure that we've noted that. So with that amendment, I think the recommendations are that the contents of the draft report be approved for submission to full council in September, and the chair be authorised to approve the final draft in consultation with the Deputy Monitoring Officer for submission to full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lorna. Does anybody have any comments on the report? Yes, Tony.
It's only just one question, Lorna. With the triage system, is it a bit like when you're at hospital? It goes to like a nurse first before it gets passed up to the doctors. Is that what you're talking about?
It's a screening process, essentially. We are getting some very minor complaints in that it's amazing when the assessment process starts just how much effort goes into that and what cost goes into that. And actually, when it is a very low-level thing, that it would be easier to go through this process and say, actually, we're not going to take that forward to an assessment stage. And I think that we'll see how it goes and make sure it's working. I think it's really important to make sure we're not, sort of missing important things. But sometimes, some of the things that we have had complaints about are very, very minor. The use of an emoji, I remember being one. So, I think it is something that, we need to introduce, and I have confidence in Suzanne and Linda to make sure that, it's working.
Richard, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. The statistics are extremely interesting. Very clear weighting towards the parish councillors, where the actual chief investigation was on permanent. What interests me is those 38, are they spread fairly evenly between all the parishes, or are they concentrated on?
There is a clustering, yes. I have to be honest. There's a few councils where there has been they've been going through a difficult time, and what tends to happen with these complaints is you get one in, it encourages another one, then there'll be a counter one, and another one, and so it goes on. So, we have tried in the past to take a slightly different approach and, work with particular parishes to get beyond that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So very much this screening process is designed to stop the tit-for-tat stuff.
And if I can come back on that, yes, that's really good that you have identified some problematic parish councillors and parish councils, and you have made particular efforts in relation to those. I've got a question about the scope of the Code of Conduct. The scope of conduct applies to councillors. Has any thought been given to it being extended to parish clerks under certain circumstances?
That's an interesting question, but no, I don't think that's possible. It is very much about a councillor in their role as a councillor. So, if a clerk were to step out of line, it's for the parish council to really deal with that. It's their business to deal with that. It doesn't mean that we can't flag things and concerns, but not through this process.
You then say to the parish councillors in that particular area, I wonder whether it would be a good idea for you to have training along with your parish clerk, or whether the parish councillors, you could actually draw their attention to the situation and say, maybe you do need to address the problem arising here.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. And, the standards in public life, the Nolan principles, apply to officers as much as they do to members. So training around that is certainly something we could think about doing. And training with clerks and councillors together is an interesting idea. I'm not sure how much of that has gone on in the past, but we can certainly give it a bit of a go and see how that goes. And just a quick team session really on something like that would be possible, I think.
Just to add from the chair that the East Sussex Association of Local Councils does offer whole council training, which includes the clerk, but obviously not every parish council takes advantage of it. Can we therefore accept this report for submission to the full council with the amendment, and can you authorise me to approve the final draft in consultation with the Deputy Monitoring Officer? Everybody agreed.
Yeah, I propose and second as chair.
I need a seconder when I propose from the chair?
Yes.
Anyway, Councillor Biggs will second.
Just to let you know, Chair, I've got a bit of a problem. Duncan sat in another version of the team. Oh, he's here. That's great. He's actually sorted that out.
Welcome, Duncan, to our meeting. We say goodbye to our independent members. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight. I'm sorry it was so brief. We now move on to the audit part of the agenda, and we begin with the annual report to Council. It sets out the outline of our role, our purpose, our background, and summarises the work that we've done during the year. Are there any comments on this? If everybody is happy with it, then we need to note the report, affirm what we've done, and indeed we probably ought to note that the report will go to full council for further consideration. But this is the final version. Everybody happy with that? I move again from the chair. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Gray. And everybody is in favour, I take it. Agreed. Excellent. Right. We now move on to item 7, which is the Treasury Management update. I think, Andrew, you're going to introduce this? Yeah.
So very briefly, this is the Q4 report for Treasury. You'll be able to see that in paragraph 5 that the Council's investments yielded 1.427 million of interest, which was well in excess of the annual budget of 586,000. The main reason for this, obviously, is the higher interest rates that everyone's well aware of and suffering from at the minute, or benefiting from, depending on your financial position. So that is an additional surplus of £841,000, which is very welcome in our revenue budget and has helped offset some of the savings that weren't made last year. In terms of borrowing, things are very flat. There was no further PWB borrowing last year, so that remains at 31.7 million. The council is under borrowed and has been able to use internal borrowing to stay well below its CFR position. So at the minute, a very healthy position, both in terms of income coming in and not borrowing any more to date. Obviously, as Duncan will go on to say later, there is a big capital programme that will significantly change that position in due course. But at the minute, that is quite low level of borrowing and very healthy investment income coming in. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions to Andrew or any comments on this report?
Just to say,
yes, Councillor.
Just to say, well done.
Yes, I think the only cautionary word is, although welcome from the point of view of mortgage holders, interest rates are likely to come down this year, and that means the highly favourable position on income generation, which is a tribute really to the hard work of our team under Andrew and previously under Duncan, will not be quite as successful. So with that cautionary word, I think really we are dealing with a very, very important document, which is also a tribute really to the success of everybody in the officer team. I think we only need to note this, don't we? But we might add a word of congratulation, I think, in the comments, because I really do think the new departure, which was begun in Duncan's time and continued by Andrew, has really delivered the goods and been very helpful in a difficult year. With that, we move on to the next item of our agenda, which is the Local Code of Corporate Governance and the Annual Governance Statement. Warner, you're presumably going to take us. Oh, Andrew's going to take us through this.
Okay, so this is a report you get annually. Gets published alongside the annual accounts on the website and audited alongside the accounts by the external auditors. It's an update of last year. Duncan did a fantastic job last year of really bringing Rover up to speed in terms of this sort of governance review. In years prior to that, I think it was a lot thinner in terms of what the authority did. This is, you know, as good as it gets, really. All we've had to do this year in terms of Statutory Officers Group have reviewed it and updated it. Some of the recommendations from last year still hold true, and there's still need implementing. There are some additional recommendations. They are in yellow through the first Appendix A, or the best place probably to look for recommendations is the table at the end of Appendix B, which just relists most of those recommendations in terms of actions needed to take to improve governance. It's quite a long report, so I won't go through it. Obviously, we'll endeavour to take questions on it.
Are there any questions or comments to be made?
It covers a lot of council activity.
I have to say, we do owe Duncan Ellis a tremendous tribute, and indeed this committee, for deciding really that our previous practice was not up to scratch. And indeed, the audit committee had never actually scrutinised its own performance, which is a rather important part of, I think, the Code of Governance. So this is a much improved document, and there are still one or two small bits to be done, but I think the position in general is pretty satisfactory. Patrick, independent member, Patrick Farmer. Sorry, could you switch on your microphone?
I say I'm one of those nerds that actually reads documents the whole way through, and I have to say it was hard going. Anyone who's tried, it's like reading the terms and conditions that nobody ever looks at on a business. But there was one point just stuck out to me. I think it's on page, let's have a look, 33, which refers to this committee. And the council developed the fact that the committee keeps the officers in line by looking and raising points and questions, which from my experience they do very well. The only thing that's missing is that they raise points, very valid points, are often accepted and agreed to action, yet there is no minuting of this action. It's something I've brought up before. There is no minuting, there's no follow-up, so there's never really a closed loop that ensures that the things that this committee raises are completed and implemented in the future. And it just seems to me a very odd missing in something that's a very comprehensive document, but doesn't actually cover the idea that actions raised by this committee are followed up and completed. So that's just the point I'd like to raise.
Yes, you raised this point last year, Patrick. I think
I have every year, to be honest, John.
I think probably could we ask the chief executive to consider how we best close that loop, and we will ask Louise to minute the point so that it is addressed before our next meeting.
It is very unusual. I've sat on governance in further education and other areas, and a trustee, and I've never known a system where there aren't an actions arising coming in minutes and then being followed up. So the way councils operate seems to be quite out of the normal governance process.
I rather agree with that, having served on a large number of bodies in my time. So we will ask that point to be taken up, and we will minute that we are going to take it up.
I think perhaps what we need to do is focus on the action, and the matters arising bit, we don't do it that way. But what we could do is, depending on the action that is being proposed, it might be something that we put into our annual governance statement, and something quite big that needs to go there. Might be something that we need to bring to a future meeting, and it goes on the work programme. And I think those two things together will probably address the point that we need to be making sure the action continues. Does that work?
Possibly. I'd have to see it in practice to say whether it works or not.
I think it probably would work. We don't do matters arising, so we do need to create a mechanism. And clearly we don't want trivial matters, but serious ones, a report back by the Chief Executive would be appropriate, I think. Councillor Thomas.
Just backing up what Mr. Farmer said and what Lorna Thorpe said, it is a really good idea, I think, to add some sort of follow-through. Just one of the ways that I think you can guarantee that's going to happen is to attach the action to a particular person who's responsible for it happening. And just using my own experience, and this is a great concession on my behalf, I sometimes read through documents and it says, so-and-so to be done by R. Thomas. I think, oh my goodness, I have not done that. And then I try and do it at the last minute. So I think there is something to be said for a system whereby when the annual report is coming up, you remind people who were responsible for the actions, and so they can see whether they've done them. So I think some system of attaching the idea to a person is most likely to guarantee it's going to happen. Thanks.
Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, a lot of this some of this is highlighted in yellow. Some have got dates for it to be actioned by, and some haven't. So is there a plan, a definite date where it just says action?
I think if you turn to the appendix, all the actions have a date alongside them.
Okay, apologies, Chair.
I'm not sure in the yellow bits that those have always been identified, but the appendix is the work programme, telling you exactly when they're going to be identified.
Okay.
We'll give you a moment to turn to the appendix.
Thank you.
I'm taking it, therefore, there are no further comments, and we can approve this governance statement. I move that again from the chair. Councillor Gray is seconding. Everybody in favour? In which case we can move on to agenda item 9, which is the Corporate Programme Board update. Andrew, will you take us into this?
I think that's had the wrong title transposed onto it at some point. This is the Capital Programme update.
So you want Duncan to have this?
Yeah, because this went to Cabinet last Monday,
Yep.
Monday of last week, and it's been copied across to this agenda and somehow picked up the wrong title. But it is Capital Programme update.
My apologies, Duncan. I should have asked you to introduce. We will correct the title in the minutes. Duncan, please take us through this document.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you. I think the title actually is correct. I think the minutes from a few meetings ago asked for an update on the work of the Corporate Programme Board, and a huge chunk of that work is focused around some key schemes within the capital programme. So actually the focus of this report is on the capital programme. It may be in future meetings that you'd like to explore in more detail some of the other work streams. So the Fit for the Future work stream, the Savings and Efficiency Programme, the People Strategy, the Strategic Asset Management Plan. But for this report, I've particularly focused on capital, just to try and bring some of the newer members up to speed on what is a very substantial programme. So if I can share, I'll just run you through some key elements of the report. So we're looking at a capital programme of almost £250 million now, which for a small authority is significant. Of that, we've got about 195 million to spend over future years. So that poses a significant risk to the authority, but also a huge opportunity. It's a really exciting programme. It's really ambitious, but given the current financial climate, the pressures on the revenue budget that Andrew's already alluded to, we need to make sure that future capital programme is affordable. So members will be aware that it's been largely paused for about the last 18 months. So when I was previously 151 officer, we said we were going to take a step back from the spend, given how significant it was, because we're in a very different financial climate. So when those business cases for the schemes were previously approved, some of those were 3 or 4 years ago, and we're in a very different place now. We've had hugely high inflation, we've had increase in construction costs, higher borrowing costs, and all of those things have negatively impacted on the programme, particularly when so much you'll pick up from the report is proposed to be funded from borrowing. So again, there's two sides to that. Andrew's talked about the positive side from Treasury Management and the investment income. The negative side is if we want to borrow money to fund the capital programme. And we're currently, as we sit here tonight, looking at about 5.25%, give or take. Whereas you go back only a couple of years and we could have accessed borrowing at 2%. So that's a big difference, and it makes a lot of difference in terms of some of these business cases. I've tried to pick out in paragraph 6, I won't run through all the schemes. There's about 8 major schemes there that account for about 90% of the future of the capital programme. So there are some big pieces of work, some big proposed developments there, like the leisure centre, like the housing development and things like that. The one thing I'd say as well about the programme at the moment, there is the opportunity potentially for us to draw a line under some schemes and say the business case doesn't stack up, we're not going to pursue this anymore. Equally though, there are some schemes, so the King Offer Housing and Leisure Centre, for example, at the moment in the capital budget, that's at £10 million. Now, we've recently been awarded our Levelling Up Partnership money, so £18 million, give or take. Half of that money, so £9 million, has been allocated to the Leisure Centre project. Having said that, we can't deliver the planned Leisure Centre, which is a new swimming pool facility and a leisure centre in Bexhill, for £10 million. It's going to cost us significantly more than that. So depending on how we treat the housing element of that, it could be a 20 or 30 million pound development. So while I'm saying at the moment we've got several hundred millions of pounds worth of spend in the programme as it is, that could increase. So that's just something to be mindful of. Again, with a scheme like that, we will bring a fully developed, updated business case, because there was a business case presented about 3 years ago in relation to that project. But a big chunk of that, £5 million, was predicated on using SIL. Things have moved on. We don't have £5 million of SIL around now to invest in that project. So as officers, the council is going to have to look at different ways as to how it can bridge that funding gap. So the £9 million from LUP is really, really positive, a huge contribution to a leisure centre, but there's still a long way to go to make sure we can bridge that gap. So paragraphs 12 to 18 outline how the capital programme can impact on revenue, because again, I think that's often something that's overlooked, because capital and revenue are often talked about very separately, but the capital programme can both positively and negatively impact on the council's revenue budget. So we need to be mindful of those decisions and the increased burden on revenue because of the decisions we take about the capital. I've also put a pie chart in there at paragraph 20 that really brings home how the programme is currently funded. So you'll see from that pie chart that about 55% is actually coming from borrowing. So that's, again, a significant impact on the revenue budget because we have to repay that debt. It's really positive that we've got about 39% of grant funding. So again, given the size of the capital programme, having almost 40% of that funded by grant is amazing because we don't have those borrowing costs. That's really, really positive. But you'll see as well that only 3% is funded from capital receipts. So for those of you that were at Cabinet or have read the Cabinet papers, the Strategic Asset Management Plan went to Cabinet recently. That's got a work programme within it that will review some of our assets to see what we might be able to dispose of. So that strategy is all about making our assets work harder. So we might be able to sell some of those assets to generate capital receipts that can then come back into the capital programme that will reduce those borrowing costs. So that would have a beneficial impact on the revenue budget. So again, conscious that we've got some new members. I know lots of you will have been in the position now for just over a year following the elections in May. But the majority of these schemes we continue to talk about in the capital programme were agreed and approved 2, 3, 4 years ago. So paragraphs 23 to 25 provide a high level update on some of those schemes. There's also a couple of exempt appendices, so Appendix 1 and 2, I think they're numbered. There's a risk register and there's a bit more detail about the schemes. Just to mention, Chair, if we are going to talk about those appendices in any detail, which we might not need to do tonight, we would need to go into private session because they do contain commercially sensitive information. So we will be bringing forward further business cases. Barnhorn Green is a good example. King Offer Leisure Centre I've mentioned already. Again, we will bring a detailed business case forward to say how we propose to fund that scheme. But it's vital, as Andrew comes into setting the budget, updating the medium-term financial strategy, that we understand what the revenue impacts of those schemes are. And I'd suggest at this point in time, given the revenue pressures, given the level of reserves that the authority currently has, that if a scheme is not at least breaking even, if not generating some income, then it's really not affordable for us to do. We have some additional pressures that are coming through the budget as it is. So we just need to be very mindful that, again, as I said at the start, while this is a huge opportunity for the authority and local residents, it equally is a significant risk. And when you have 7, 8, 9 of these big schemes within your programme, that risk compounds. So for an authority our size, I might expect maybe 1 or 2 of those schemes to be in our programme, but when you've got 8 or 9, that really is something different to consider. So I think we need to be careful about what that looks like in the future, careful with our borrowing, careful about the impacts on the revenue budget. But again, positive about things because some of these capital schemes can generate revenue income that will help to plug those budget deficits we keep talking about. So in conclusion, it's a challenging programme. It's an exciting time. There are some challenging areas in terms of delivery for some of those grants we've talked about. I'm hoping some of the decisions with the new government will give us longer timeframes and more realistic timeframes to spend some of the grants, because often we're only given a year's notice and the announcements about when the money's going to come through are often delayed. So actually in practice, we don't even get a year. Now, when you think about value for money, going through the procurement processes we need longer than that to really make sure the money is spent in the best way we can. So I'm hoping those things will change. But it's that's a high level update for you. Hopefully that's helpful. Like I say, there's other work streams that the corporate programme board look at that might be the discussion and subject of papers in future meetings, but this has been very much a focus on the capital programme, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Councillor Thomas, you look pregnant with a remark.
I have to say that I'm almost like a Victorian woman in that respect, maybe. But no, I wasn't going to make a remark, simply because as chair of the Housing Company, it would be against the code of conduct for me to do so. That's the reason why.
Yes, a declaration of interest.
That's right, yeah.
Yep. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Duncan. It's a really helpful report and actually quite easy to read, which was a pleasure. My question is regarding the Beeching Road food store. I could never quite believe that they decided we need another food store in Bexhill. I think we're practically awash with food stores, only outnumbered by charity shops, I think, and particularly the lower end. You know, we've got, well, I could list them all for you. We've certainly got Aldi and Lidl, we've got Morrison's, we've got the Co-op, we've got Sainsbury's, we've got Tesco's. if that decision is decided to remove that one, I'm just wondering what would happen to that site, because I think it's been empty for quite a few years now, and it's a big site, and it's quite a good position. You may not be able to answer this, but I just feel it's a waste of a site in close to the town centre. And do we really need another food store?
I rather think you're raising a more general point, because in some ways, if Duncan is right about the programme being perhaps rather too much, that may alter, of course, in terms of phasing, because with interest rates coming down, you might find that if you phase them right, you can get the finances in order. But possibly one of the things that needs to be done is to decide which ones are furthering policy and which are simply about creating income. I'm not saying creating income is of no value to this authority, but they ought to be realistic bets. And you're raising a question whether that one is a realistic bet.
And maybe I'm saying there's a better use for that site.
Mr. Farmer, Patrick.
My question's about the development programme team, because I've noted that certainly I think the 3 years I've been here, the budget shows a large capital programme, and at the end of the year very little of it's actually happened, for very good reasons, understandable reasons, and it seems very likely that that pattern of not being able to complete the projects will continue. Yet this proposal for a development programme team costing £676,000 will definitely happen. Once it's done, you've recruited the people, you'll spend that every year. That seems to be a very risky thing to do, to manage a capital programme that may slip. Wouldn't it be more sensible, more prudent, maybe to go for a smaller team and then build it as programmes go ahead, rather than start off with a very large and expensive programme management team?
Duncan, do you want to answer that, or shall I turn to Andrew and Lorna?
I'm very happy, Chair, to start off the conversation, and if Lorna and Andrew want to chip in, that's great, thank you. I think part of the proposal around the development team is actually specifically to address that issue that Mr. Farmer has just raised. So in terms of delivery, so when you look back over the last, say, 5 years, it's not just the recent pause we've had because of all of that economic upheaval. There has been a history of delay, slippage, underperformance in the capital programme. And a lot of that is down to resource. So the idea behind the development team is to make sure we have the resource to deliver what, as I've outlined, is a huge capital programme. Now, again, coming back to Mr. Farmer's point, some of those schemes absolutely may not go ahead. But even if a fifth of it doesn't go ahead, you've still got a couple of £100 million almost within that programme to deliver, and exceedingly tight timescales to deliver. Now, one of the things we're actually doing in terms of making sure that capacity is right for us, we will be looking at fixed term positions. So absolutely, in terms of that programme, we're doing work at the moment to work out when the peaks and troughs in the work will come forward, to make sure that if we have a number of schemes that need to deliver, whether it's planning, whether it's a grant position, whatever that might be, that we have adequate resource in place to address those issues. And one of the ways we can do that without necessarily having completely full-time posts is to have a fixed term resource. Sometimes that gives you its own challenges in terms of the ability to recruit and the level of people you get that are interested in those jobs. If it's, say, a 2-year fixed term post, that's not necessarily attractive to everyone, but it is a way of managing that. And we've also said in the discussions around this report and the support from that team that actually there'll still probably always be a requirement at certain stages of projects to have interim support, because you may have a very specialist project like the leisure centre. If you look across the board nationally at local authorities, leisure centres are getting harder and harder to deliver. I've delivered one recently, Andrew's delivered one recently, but it's something that authorities are finding incredibly difficult to finance when it's part of the wellbeing agenda, but not necessarily a statutory duty like bin collection might be. So with pressure on budgets, delivering new facilities that are costing 20 or 30 million pounds is a huge challenge. And you may need some very specialist support for 6 months, a year to get those things over the line. And again, you wouldn't necessarily want to be having a full-time resource in a team that provides that. The other comment I'll make, the £600,000 that's discussed in the report, what we're talking about doing is actually bringing several members of staff that are currently in place and paid for within the revenue budget into this team. So the £600,000 is a gross cost, but actually around £250,000 of that is currently budgeted for already. And the other benefit of bringing this team together is that we can legitimately capitalise this cost. So when you've got a huge capital programme, as we have, you can legitimately charge officer time into that capital programme. And because the programme is so large, we've got an ability to move some of that revenue cost across to the capital programme. So there are lots of benefits. There are some risks. We're trying to mitigate those risks in lots of different ways. But that's how we're looking to take things forward at the moment.
Councillor Thomas.
I'd like to agree very strongly with what Duncan has just said, because I think it has been one of the weaknesses of this council in the past, that its project management could have been a great deal better, and it's cost the council money. And so the amount of money that's going to be spent will be infinitesimally small in comparison with the amount of money that good project management would save. That's my first point. My second point is, I'm a little bit worried about the fact that it's very much a committee structure. I think there's something to be said for employing first-rate project managers and giving them the chance to concentrate upon particular projects. My third point is that this recruitment of the project management team can go alongside the refashioning of the senior management team. And I think that to bring those two together is really important. And I'd just like to add a particular observation of mine on this. As I understand it, the investigation into the whole business of the way in which senior management is conducted was done on the basis, I think it's called a target management process. Yeah, have I got the right phrase?
Model?
Target.
A target
operating model. Now, my suggestion about that is that what has come out from that is a series of functions, most of which, but not all, are to do with administrative objectives. And my thought is that it might be possible to combine that with the wider objectives of the council. I found, for example, that somebody who's been recruited to another authority with the interesting title of Head of Climate Change and Green Regeneration. And I like that because it brings together different objectives of the council, green to the core, etc., the importance of regeneration and so on. And I think if we could look at that refashioning of senior management and find ways to assign roles that combine the administrative objectives with, if you like, the political and social objectives, that might be a way of reordering things. I just thought I'd throw that into the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, I will ask Lorna to comment in a moment, but certainly we ought to have learned lessons from the way the infrastructure project on Blackfriars went wildly over budget. Not entirely the fault of management, because there were some unexpected pitfalls. But I cannot help feeling that if this team had been in place, that project would have been infinitely better managed, and we would not be some 9 million over budget on it. That said, I think one or two of Duncan's points need to be minuted. The net cost is clearly smaller. I think it is right that this is largely a charge on the capital programme, and I think the idea of specific contracts, fixed term, needs to be one that we endorse. Maybe these are jobs for people who have lots of experience but are beginning to ease back in their work, but can bring their skills to bear in a fixed term way. So it could be quite attractive, I think, for somebody winding down a little, who don't want to give up work altogether. So number of points there which I think are germane. One of the things I don't think we ought to lose sight of is a lot of our regeneration projects were also designed to actually improve our revenue position so that we didn't have to cut projects like leisure, which aren't statutory but are key to our health and well-being strategy. So we need to drive that regeneration forward, and green regeneration is obviously flavour of the month and probably flavour of the next 5 years. So a number of thoughts I would agree with you and take a little further, I think, Richard. Lorna, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Thomas. Yes, you raised some interesting points, actually. The target operating model is something that we've been working through our people strategy, and that tells us how we want to do business. The other things that have been driving the structure are our council plan, what needs to be delivered. So certainly the green agenda and green to the core is very much, I don't see it as part of one department or one service. Going forward, it will be part of everybody's job. It's everybody's job to have a contribution to that agenda. Doesn't mean that we don't need some central coordination, and we are strengthening that. I don't want this to become a discussion about that report, but the other key driver of it is the programme that we're talking about this evening, and actually that new team is part of that new structure and has been very much central to our thinking. And I agree with Councillor Barnes. There's opportunity there, not just for people at the end of their career, but for career paths, for people to move from other teams. And, actually it's a really exciting team to be a part of. I'm really hoping that we can grow our own and, use less consultants as time goes on. As Duncan says, there will always be a need. But it will be a multidisciplinary team. There will be capital accountants, there will be surveyors, project managers, programme managers. All of these roles need to work together as a team. And what's happening at the moment is that's all quite disparate, and pulling it together and giving it a real focus and strength and a real purpose, and understanding how that contributes to what we're trying to achieve as a council is what it's all about. So I hope that has explained that. Okay.
Sorry, I want to ask whether anybody wants to discuss specific projects, because if so, I will next take us into closed session. But if nobody does, we can approve this report and move on. I don't see anybody indicating they want to raise a particular project, in which case, going back really to our objectives, actually there's one point which we might want to talk about, but let's approve this report because it's in the risk register, and we may want to ask a question, and if necessary I'll move us into it, but I think we can approve this report, which is really simply a noting job. I think we will ask that some of the points made are minuted, because I think they will be useful going forward. I think the only point I had a question on is really around the risk register, and I think I can probably ask it without needing to go into confidence, because Duncan raised it, and that is some of the timeframes around levelling up are undeliverable, really, in terms of the timescales that have been set from the centre. And And I just wonder what we are doing about that, because that does seem to me quite an important point.
It is something that we have raised with our new MPs. We've written to both of our new MPs and raised this as a concern. It was something that we were talking to DLUG, as it was called at the time, about, and were sort of awaiting answers on some of the timescales. So it is being addressed. I think I've also raised it at an East Sussex level, and we have a list of priorities for lobbying government on, and it's to be added into that as well, because those timescales, and with an election in between as well, and that does slow things down, they are challenging. And as you say, it's not just us that has struggled with that. I think the first round of Levelling Up Fund, I think only 20% of the money went out of the door within that timescale. So this isn't a Rother problem, this is a national problem, and unrealistic timescales that are set on getting some of this money spent. So it is absolutely a priority that we keep that on the agenda, and we understand what the expectations are going forward.
Patrick, Councillor Farmer.
I was just going to ask, do you think that was a deliberate policy by the last government?
I'd prefer not to comment on that, if that's okay.
We're not in purdah, but self-imposed purdah. I think that question having been answered, we can move on to the next item, which is the work programme. Sorry, Councillor Thomas.
Of the money which was due to Councillors' Council, has all the money now gone into the bank in such a way that it can't be recovered by the government if it so wished to do so?
Andrew, I think you better answer on the legal position.
I mean, they've paid us the money up front, all of it. Very generous of them. I'm not party to the exact wording.
I think, they're very, very different funds. So the long-term plan for towns is over 10 years, completely different. So, I think we'll need to fight hard for that, and we'll need to make clear that money is really, really important. It was given to us for a reason. It was given to us for all of the data that they collected, that we were identified. Only 3 places, actually it became more in the end. But, in East Sussex, I think it's Eastbourne, Hastings and Bexhill have been identified for those funds. And then the Levelling Up Partnership was a very different kind of agreement to the Levelling Up Fund. So the legality of this is quite tricky to work through, but we will be absolutely fighting our corner to make sure those funds stay in Rother. So we're still, I think the government is still sort of churning through and working out what it intends to do with all of this. We did have a letter from the Deputy Prime Minister last week that just extended the deadline, actually extended the deadline of the town board, which was kind of welcomed. We've done a lot of work to get the investment plan, 3-year investment plan, and the vision for Bexhill put together. The town board had done a lot of work around that and a lot of engagement to get that done for the 1st of August, and that's now been delayed. And I don't think we should read too much into that, but I think, we should be continually making the case for why that funding is needed here.
I just have the feeling that the coastal towns problem is one which will now be recognised, because so many of the coastal towns actually are now, their MPs are government supporters. I think if the government really means country before party, it would look very odd if we were to lose the money, or Eastbourne were to lose the money, and Hastings retain it. So I'm optimistic that the tone of voice from the new government means that they will not undo that work. But I think we need to watch the point and work with other coastal towns to point out that levelling up is not simply about north-south. There are areas in the south that have much in common with areas in East Anglia or indeed in the northwest, because they are coastal towns suffering from many of the same problems. In which case, can we move on then to our last item, which is the work programme? Is everybody happy with that? Councillor Gray.
Well, thank you, Chair. Please would you accept my apologies for the 30th of September. I'm very sorry. Before I knew the programme, I've arranged to be away, so my apologies.
I hope you have a very happy break. If there are no points to be made, can we approve the work programme? I congratulate you all on your timekeeping, and we move to declare the meeting closed at 7:26. 26. Miracle.